Episode 2 starts with the introduction of Jayce, and the writers very purposely start his introduction with the scene of Vi and Powder robbing his apartment. Jayce is a prominent character in the story of Arcane, and I think most books would have introduced him in Chapter 2, but Arcane chooses to introduce him now. A part of this reason is definitely the fact that this is the start of Episode 2, and they want to concentrate the majority of an episode to Jayce. But there is another reason why they do this, and this is also the reason why you see this scene happen first and not the scene of him as a child. Do you remember what I said about writers making you want to care about characters in Episode 1? Well, by the end of Episode 1, it's safe to say that you care more for Vi and Powder than we did at the beginning. We've seen more of their life and their struggles. We know more about them as people. And that's why Jayce is introduced now. Because we care more for Vi and Powder, we care more about their actions and the consequences of those actions, and who they might have wrongfully hurt. When we're introduced to Jayce, we don't just see a person who got his home robbed. We see the person that has suffered due to Vi and Powder. This instantly creates a connection between him and our main characters, making us instantly care more about him than we would have had he been introduced early on in Episode 1, or even in Episode 2, but without the robbery scene giving him that connection to Vi and Powder. Also notice in the scene how they introduced Jayce without showing his face and without even telling us his name. I believe this is also meant to allow us to form that connection between him and Vi and Powder before he is revealed to us as a character. And then, almost as expected, we see Jayce in his lowest moment, a moment that will define him as a character and allow us to understand who he is and what motivates him. A solid writing technique to make us care for a character. And this is another scene with very little dialogue, like with the first scene of Episode 1, allowing us to figure out what is happening just by watching. I think this also draws parallels to Vi and Jinx's opening scene, bigging up the importance of Jayce's character in our minds. We see that he wants to harness magic to save the lives of others, and though this is forbidden, we side with Jayce and agree with his justification because we have seen what he has been through. It's really interesting how these scenes are essentially reversed from the first episode, where we see Vi and Powder's lowest moments first and then the robbery scene. With Jayce, they obviously wanted to make that connection to Vi and Powder first, and it certainly feels a lot more powerful this way. This is a technique I've not used in my writing, but I'm definitely keeping it in mind for the future. Before we go further, I want to talk a bit about the inciting incident. The inciting incident in a story is an event that sets the main character or characters on the journey through the narrative. In other words, the story would not happen without this event. As such, this is an event that sticks in our mind and gives the main character their resolve through their journey. For example, in John Wick, the inciting incident would be John Wick's dog getting killed. If the hero is on a tough journey, this scene can be the resolve for both the hero and the viewers, as it is the most memorable scene in our minds. And in John Wick, if one of the thugs asks for mercy, we instantly think what John Wick is thinking without it even needing to be said.
You killed my dog.
The inciting incident can also indicate what kind of story we're in for and set the tone for the future, John Wick being a darker tone and a story of revenge. The inciting incident in Arcane is the robbery on Jayce's apartment, or more specifically, Powder accidentally dropping the Hextech crystal, which blows up half of the apartment. In this case, the inciting incident is effectively telling us that this story is likely going to be one of misfortune and potentially one of tragedy. And the fact that the accident was caused by Powder further strengthens the link in our mind that she is a Jinx, because at any point in this story we can say that this wouldn't have happened if she hadn't have just screwed up here. Had the robbery happened without any issue, Vi and the others would never have been seen. Jayce's apartment would not have been investigated, and the Hextech wouldn't have been found. Vi and the others would not have had to have laid low, Vander would not have started to lose power in the underground, and as such, Silco may never have made a move on him at that point. And as Powder would not have had the Hextech crystals, she would never have tried to use them, leading to the death of her friends, which would eventually lead to her madness. Arcane has a really great inciting incident because the effects are felt everywhere throughout all the characters and in all parts of the city. And even at the very end of the very last episode of Arcane, the effects of this incident are still front and center. Again, Arcane loves to do multiple things in their scenes. In this scene, showing us what Jayce was doing was illegal, revealing the true consequences of Vi and Powder's actions, and introducing Viktor and setting the seeds that will drive Viktor to action later in the story. I also like that the Enforcer Chief Grayson is here as well, another way of linking events from episode 1 and allowing us to understand why she went to see Vander, again, without telling us directly. Showing Jayce look at the crystal here is purposeful, to show us that he is or will be having a dilemma about his actions. Again, the conversation very quickly making a link between Jayce and Heimerdinger through very natural dialogue. This very quickly lets us form a connection in our mind of who this person is to Jayce, allowing us to emphasize with him more. It's easy to see that this person is like a mentor to Jayce, someone of whom Jayce respects. As well as introducing Heimerdinger, this scene also sets up who he is and his motives through the story, as well as how his ideals will conflict with Jayce's later on. Back to Vi, an intense scene of her practicing her punches, which I believe also re-emphasizes her resolve, clearly annoyed at her own weakness that she's still not strong enough. The scoreboard is all Vi with 2 Clagger on the end. Just a little bit of detail meant to tell us that Clagger can hold his own, but perhaps more so to show how far ahead Vi is compared to Clagger and other kids her age. Clagger mentions that Milo is worried that Powder might beat him again, and here we have extra detail as to why he picks on Powder. She is a better shot than he is. He knows that she is skilled and that likely one day she will replace his space in the group. And now we know that him picking on Powder is likely out of jealousy, frustration, and even a little bit of fear. In my opinion, I don't think the writers needed to go into as much detail, but I'm glad they did, because it adds so much more depth to these characters and their family dynamics. And we see firsthand as Powder whoops Milo's ass at target practice. Outside, Marcus and the other enforcers are looking for Vi and the others, and now we have extra context as to why. It's not just because a building exploded, but because of the Hextech cores that was stolen. Knowing this is another hint that bad things are on the horizon, because as far as Vander knows, they only destroyed a bit of property, and he's acting as such, but they actually did something far worse. I also think it's purposeful that Powder goes up to the window in this scene and sees things happening before the man gets flung through the glass. The odds of the enforcers finding them is very low. I mean, they just happen to have an argument outside the building that they're in and then just happen to throw a guy through the glass. But because it's Powder that is seeing this happen, we don't get annoyed that this is some random unlucky event that's happened. We think, well, it happened because Powder's a Jinx. And having us form that connection in our mind without Milo saying it is powerful and very well done. Because had this scene happened without anyone going up to the window, I can imagine a lot of people getting angry and very annoyed with it for being just so random. I mean, imagine they're just doing their thing in the building and then a guy just suddenly gets flung through the glass and the enforcers are there. And again, I have to emphasize just how good the writing is here, in how the writers were able to cross what is effectively a tightrope of a scene and get safely to the other side. Anyway, the enforcers try to search them and they run. Milo's play shots at the enforcers quickly serve to show us how the group are wholly ineffective against them compared to the gang from the day before, with Vi seemingly being the only one capable of doing any damage to them. I think this is the first scene where a character is introduced not through another character. And again, this feels purposeful. We're not supposed to care for Councillor Medarda, or Mel as I'll be calling her in the future, like we are for the other characters, but question her intentions on the council. This is made possible by not being introduced through another, making her connections to the others unknown. Notice how this scene also starts with a zoomed out shot, allowing us to focus on the dialogue so that our first introduction to this character is about her wealth and power as opposed to who she is or what she looks like. This definitely feels less personal than the ways we've been introduced to the other characters. And again, because we're not meant to care for her like we are for the other characters. And as such, this introduction serves better for her purpose within the story. The dialogue at the beginning of the scene quickly tells us of her wealth, power, and motive. This scene and the next are also preparation for the council meeting, allowing us to know at least a few of the council members, mainly the ones that Jayce knows, so that they aren't just a table full of random faces. We start to see tensions rise in the underground, with Vander trying all he can to prevent the same tragedy that happened in the opening scene of episode 1. It's also nice to see that the woman who becomes Silco's bodyguard in the future gets her kind of introduction right here. This scene is interesting with its intentions. On the surface, we see Mel giving a gift to the member of the council, Hoskell, and forgive me if I'm butchering any of these names, so that she can better manipulate the outcome of the votes. However, the connotations are that the council is fallible. We clearly see not every member of the council should really be running a city. This one unable to complete even a child's toy. On one hand, this gives the members of the council a little more personality, but in a way this is saying to us that they are flawed and that the rules they have set in place are not necessarily correct. Rules perhaps pertaining to the arcane. Going back to personality, the council members certainly have it. Shula with the clockwork garment, which clearly showing the level of technology that Piltover has, and perhaps even given hints as to why these people are on the council. Sallow, the ginkgo nut guy that we see, is perhaps dealing in ginkgo nut and other produce, and that's how he made his wealth and made his way onto the council. I also wanted to talk a little about the council meeting itself. There's a lot of work done here to make sure that we as the viewers can understand all of the mechanics at play and the motivations of the other council members, which is impressive for the small amount of screen time dedicated to the setup. I mean, just think about what this vote would have been like if we knew nothing about the other council members. But don't you understand? Magic can change our lives. They could make everyone's lives better.
Nah, you're getting banished.
Why? Why won't you listen to me?
Because I felt like it, okay?
What reason do you have?
Look, why are you talking back to me? Do you know who I am? Good. I don't.
Jayce getting by like he did might feel unearned, or even that he survived just due to a coin toss. The way we actually managed to see the reasoning behind most of the votes was satisfying. We know that Jayce and Heimerdinger know each other and that he wants what is best for Jayce. And we know that Caitlyn's mother also wants the same. Mel wants to put Piltover on the map and was likely intrigued by Jayce's want for controlling magic. Hence her vote and the manipulation of Hoskel's vote. Then for the votes against Jayce, we can understand Bolbok's vote against him. The reasoning for 5 of the 7 votes are made very clear, and I have to reiterate how very impressive that is with the small amount of time that has been dedicated to these characters. I feel like this act from Jayce's mother here is very intentional by the writers. That is, unless she's left-handed. But we can see that 2 of her fingers are prosthetics, which if we go back to the snow scene, we can see that she is frostbitten on those 2 fingers. So as she goes to touch the crystal, these fingers are shown close up, reminding us of what they went through. Something which Jayce's mother did not come out of unscathed, and a reminder of that event to which Jayce can see each day. A picture of Jayce with his father hints that his father may have passed away, and here we can see even more the kind of tragedy that Jayce has been through, and his drive to change the world. With all this, we don't need an inner monologue or lengthy dialogue scene to understand what Jayce is going through right now. Just a little touch I love is the posters of magic up on Jayce's wall. We're not sure how long ago he moved out of his room, but the fact that they're still up there shows us that he still has that love for magic that he gained as a child when he and his mother were saved. A comparison to note here, in the location of the council standing at the top of the world in a high location in Piltover, whereas Silco resides almost at the bottom of the seafloor, as far down as one can get. This paints him as the council's opposite and enemy. Silco convinces Deckard to take the shimmer by playing on Deckard's aspirations to be something more than just a thug. And if we look back at the knife scene from episode 1, we can see this in his character, which I love because it really feels like the writers took care and effort even for the minor characters in this show. From what we can gather with the scene with Silco, Deckard appears to want to aim high, and this is why he picked a fight in the first place. Why is Silco interested in these kids? What makes them special? Isn't he better? So after he loses his fight with Vi, he's shown that he isn't special. How can he become someone great if he is beaten here on his own streets? And this defeat is in turn what makes him take the shimmer, his past telling him that he cannot become the great person he wants to be without it. Vi, at least in part, is the greatness that Deckard aspires for, and I believe that he realises this in the moment with the knife. Well, that, and if he does stab her, then Milo and Clagger will probably kill him in retaliation. Here we see Jayce turned away by Mrs. Kiraman, unable to even speak to Caitlyn, who has been his close friend up till this time. And we can see here that he is really hitting rock bottom. He has lost not just his research, but basically everything. I love this still of the council members here, each of them striking a pose that suits their personality, and each of them standing on a different step, which appears to indicate their level of power on the council. Now that magic has been brought up, the council pushes harder to find the culprits. Marcus moving on Vander is likely due to what Silco told him, else Grayson would be there. And as also Marcus mentions an old friend and stories of Vander's past. Alcohol is associated with time out, recreation and fun. Thus the symbolism of it burning here, and indeed Marcus setting fire to it, is likely that the peace they have enjoyed has now come to an end. And as the scene ends, I think Vander realises in this moment that things are not going to die down, and we can see the dilemma on his face, the choice that he has to make of going to war with Piltover or sacrificing his kids. Vi wants to fight back. and Vander sees himself in her. He takes her back to where that battle happened in the first scene of episode 1. Faces of the victims are on the walls. Bullet holes and damage from the battle are still present, and Vander tries his best to illustrate the terror of war to Vi, and Vi feels responsible for what is happening, leading to herself giving herself up. Jayce has returned to his old apartment after having lost everything, and for all he knows, even his research by this point has been destroyed. The scene focuses on a sealed letter and Jayce's bracelet, likely a suicide note. We can understand from what we have seen that this was everything to him. Viktor stops Jayce and saves him, much like how Rise did in the past. And like how Rise gave Jayce the used crystal, Viktor extends his hand with that very same crystal to Jayce. At least we assume this person is Rise. We haven't actually been told his name within the series just yet. But for the rest of the video, I will be calling him Rise. There is a solemnness to Vi here, needing to prepare herself before she enters, knowing already what she is planning to do, and that this will likely be the last time she sees her family. She concentrates on Powder, who is most important to her, and gives her the toy that she pointed out in the last episode. I think it's clear here that Powder even knows what Vi is planning, or has a bad feeling about it. Her going to the bar with the toy may even have been a cry for help to Vander. It seems like Vi could have gotten the toy down at any time, but she didn't because she didn't need it anymore. It being up there was almost like a reminder of her own failure. However, she knew she would be going to prison, and so she got it down for Powder, so that Powder would have something from her to help her through this transition of not having Vi anymore. And perhaps a symbolic gesture from Vi to Powder, telling her that it's time for her to grow up, just like she had to. And Vander realizes at least a part of this when he picks up the stuffed animal. Here is the character map for episode 2 of Arcane. As you can see, there are a lot more characters that have been added to this since episode 1. One thing I have done is I've added these arrows at the end of each of the lines here to indicate if this character was introduced from another character. So what I mean by this is Jayce was kind of introduced from Jinx, or from Powder and Vi when his apartment was robbed. Rise obviously was saved by, saved Jayce, or who we think is Rise was saved Jayce. So he was introduced from Jayce. Caitlyn was introduced from Jayce. Hummendinger was introduced from Jayce. So we can see here that we've had a lot of characters that have been introduced from Jayce's perspective. And in this first section, we've had a lot of characters that have been introduced, from Vander's perspective, or Vi and Powder's perspective. And I did this just kind of illustrate how this map, this web of characters, just expands outwards. I think it'll be interesting to see at the end, to see, what characters get more screen time, what characters we remember more fondly of, and how they were introduced, and how many different webs they have on this diagram. Because we can see that, Jayce has a lot of people linking off from him. Vander, Vi, and Powder have a lot of characters linking off from them as well. And, I think that's really interesting. So getting on to just the more specific changes for episode 2. I haven't bothered adding in the council, despite them being on the image in the background. Mainly because they don't really link to anyone. They're not super important for the story. I guess I could just have like a council up here, but I think Mel is probably good enough. So we have Mel. Mel is really interesting because she isn't introduced through anyone else, and she's just like here. Ignore the blue line is just because the line goes underneath another line. Mel is by herself here, linking off into Jayce, and we'll get more into kind of what, if she links off into anyone in the future. I've also added in Echo's line here because Jayce was the one who bought parts from Echo, and then Echo followed him back into his apartment, and that's what kind of led to everything. But so Echo does have a link to Jayce here. And then, going from episode 2, we have Rise, who saved Jayce. We have Caitlyn, who is Jayce's friend, and we were introduced to her in that very first apartment scene. And then Caitlyn's mother, who is a part of the council and a patron for Jayce. We have Hummendinger, who also links off into Viktor, who we got introduced first of all in that apartment scene where the police are questioning Jayce. Jayce has another link to Grace, which is one of the things I really like here, and I did mention this in the video, where we get links from, specifically characters who are more episode 2 into episode 1 here. And we get another link from Silco to Marcus as well. And then I've also added in a line for Savika. I don't think she's particularly going to link off to anyone other than Silco when she becomes his bodyguard, but I figured just having her there anyway. What's really interesting about this diagram is we can kind of see that the two paths are separate. The two characters are very separated at the moment. This episode focuses mostly on Jayce, and all of Jayce's characters don't really link into any of the characters down here yet. And we can see a kind of really interesting way they tell this story in that episode 1 focused very much on the Undercity and the characters from the Undercity. Episode 2 does have the characters from the Undercity in, but it focuses mainly on creating links just through characters in Piltover. And whilst also giving a couple of links here and there to old and new characters, so we get these few links between what is essentially the Undercity down here and Piltover up the top. I think that's cool. I think this is going to be really interesting to see as we progress more and more into Arcane, and we get to see more and more of how these links all spread out into one another and how all these characters start to meet at one another and link off with one another, and that's going to be really good. Really looking forward to see what episode 3 has in store. If you like that and you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified for when episode 3 gets released. Also, I just want to give a shout out to Jamie, who helped me with the skit. You can check out his channel in the description below. This has been That Seven Rich. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.